This happened 3 summers ago, on a lake about 2 hours north of where he lived. He was 31, and he'd gotten into the habit of going out alone on weeknights, when the water was calm and nobody else wanted to bother. Nothing fancy, a small aluminum boat, just enough to get past the reeds where the base held up. That night was warm, no wind, the sky still holding some light around 8:30 when he pushed off from the dock. He didn't think anything of the other truck in the lot. There's a public ramp. People come and go. It was an older gray pickup. No plates that he remembers seeing. Parked crooked, like whoever left it was in a hurry or just didn't care. He figured someone was walking a dog on the trail along the north shore. He didn't see anyone. He didn't look twice. He just untied the line, started the motor, and headed out toward the drop-off he liked. The truck already forgotten behind him in the dark. He got maybe 40 minutes of fishing in, drifting along that drop-off, when he heard something moving through the brush on the bank. Not loud, just steady, like footsteps trying not to sound like footsteps. He looked over and didn't see anything, just the tree line getting dark. He told himself it was a deer. Deer walk like that sometimes, careful, stopping and starting, testing the ground before committing to it. So he went back to his line, told himself the lake was doing what lakes do at dusk, full of small sounds that mean nothing once you actually listen for them. Stopped for a while after that, long enough that he'd almost forgotten it. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, it started again, except this time it was moving with him. He'd drift a few feet, and a few seconds later he'd hear it shift position on the bank to stay level with the boat, matching him exactly, like something was pacing him along the shoreline in the dark, patient, unbothered, in no hurry at all. The sun went down all the way around 9:15. That's when he heard the whistle. 2 notes, low then high, the kind you'd use to call a dog, or signal to somebody waiting nearby. Came from the bank, close, maybe 30 feet from the boat. He didn't answer it. He just sat there with his rod in his hand, not reeling anything in, listening to the water settle around him. A few minutes passed. Nothing. He told himself that was it. Whoever it was had moved on, and he almost believed it, almost let his shoulders drop. Then the whistle came again, and this time something followed it into the water. Not a big splash, just a wade, like someone stepping in up to their ankles and stopping there, waiting, testing whether he'd respond. He didn't call anyone. He knew how that would sound. He'd fished that lake 100 times, and he told himself people do dumb things to scare each other out there, kids mostly, and that reacting would only make it. He started the trolling motor and moved further out, toward the middle of the lake, where the water was too deep for anyone to wade after him. For a while it was quiet. He could still make out the shape of the tree line, but nothing else. Just black water and 1 bar on his phone when he checked it, more out of habit than hope. Then his anchor light, that little white light clipped to the bow, went out. Not flickered, just off all at once, and he hadn't touched it. He sat there in the dark for what felt like a full minute before he worked up the nerve to check it, and when he did, the clip was open. Not broken. Open. Like someone's fingers had been on it, deliberately, carefully. That's the part he still can't explain because he was 30 yards from shore at that point. Easy. There's no way somebody swam out, undid that clip, and got away without him hearing a single thing in water this flat and this still. He didn't sleep that night, obviously. He ran the motor at full speed back to the ramp. His phone flashlight pointed at the water the whole way, which he knew was pointless, blinding him to everything past 10 feet. The gray truck was gone by the time he got back to the lot. Just an oil stain on the gravel where it had been. He called the sheriff's non-emergency line the next morning, mostly to have it on record. A deputy took his statement and said they'd log it, that there had been a couple of other reports from that lake over the years, people describing something similar, someone in the water at night who never showed themselves. Nothing ever came of it. No suspect, no explanation for the clip. He still fishes, but he doesn't go alone anymore, and he doesn't go anywhere near that lake. Every time he's out after dark now and it goes quiet, he thinks about that whistle and wonders if it was ever meant for him specifically, or if he just happened to be the one who answered it by being there. He was 31 that fall, staying at a rented cabin for a solo ice fishing trip near the Canadian border. The kind of trip he did every year to clear his head before winter set in for good. The cabin had no cell service, which he knew going in and didn't think twice about. The first night was uneventful. He set up his auger and his shanty out on the ice, about 200 yards from shore, came back in, made dinner, watched whatever came in on the little antenna TV. Snow fell light and steady the whole evening, the kind that doesn't stick so much as just hang in the air, softening every edge of the world outside. Around midnight he heard something out on the ice. A cracking sound, sharp, then nothing. He told himself ice does that on its own, especially with the temperature dropping the way it was. He'd heard it plenty of times before on other trips in other winters, so he closed his eyes and went back to sleep, certain the sound meant nothing at all. The next morning his shanty had been moved. Not knocked over, moved, dragged maybe 15 feet from where he'd left it, with a clean track in the snow leading up to it and then just stopping, like whoever did it had lifted the rest of the way instead of dragging it further. He checked inside. Nothing was taken. His auger was still there, his chair, everything, just rearranged like someone had sat in his spot and made themselves comfortable. He figured it was other fishermen messing with him. Maybe some local guys who didn't like an out-of-towner setting up on their ice. He almost laughed it off, told himself he'd built it into more than it was. He went out and fished that whole day like normal, and nothing happened. By evening he'd nearly convinced himself the whole thing was nothing. Just cold air and an overactive imagination filling in gaps that didn't need filling. Out here where there was no one else to ask. That night the cracking came back, except this time it didn't stop after one crack. It went on in a pattern, 3 cracks, a pause of maybe 20 seconds, 3 more, coming from somewhere out past where his shanty had been moved to. He stood at the cabin window with the lights off for a long time, watching, and he couldn't see anything past the snow, which was falling harder now, thick enough to swallow the far shore whole. He knew he'd get some grief for this part, but he didn't call anyone. There wasn't anyone to call, no signal, and the nearest town was 40 minutes by truck on roads. He didn't want to drive at night in that weather. He told himself he'd deal with it in the morning, that it was probably just the ice settling, and that he was letting the isolation get to him the way it sometimes does, out here alone with nothing but snow and static for company. Around 2 in the morning, he heard footsteps on the cabin porch. Slow, even like someone pacing back and forth in front of the door. Unhurried, almost patient. He sat up in bed and didn't move. The steps stopped right at the door. Then the handle turned just once, slow, and stopped like whoever it was found it locked and was testing it rather than trying to force it open. He didn't say anything. He didn't turn on a light. He just sat there in the dark, listening to his own breathing, until the porch went quiet again and the silence stretched on so long he almost trusted it. In the morning there were boot prints all along the porch, a size and shape he couldn't match to anything of his own, leading off the steps and out onto the ice in the same direction as the cracking sound. Then just stopping about 100 feet out, as if whoever made them had gone through the ice or simply never left a trail back at all. He packed up and left that day, a full 2 days early. He called the local sheriff's department once he had signal, and they said they'd send someone to check the cabin. But by the time he spoke to the owner a week later, they told him nothing unusual had turned up. No signs of a break-in past what he'd already described himself. He never went back to that cabin, and he still doesn't ice fish alone. What gets to him isn't the footsteps, and it isn't the cracking out on the ice. It's that whoever was out there had a full night to come inside if they wanted to. The door was right there, tested and left, and they didn't. He still doesn't know if that means he got lucky that night, or if getting inside was never really the point of any of it, and something else entirely was. He was 31, with more weekends off than he'd had in years, so he finally did something he talked about for a long time. A solo overnight kayak fishing trip on a river 3 hours from home, camping on a sandbar for the night. He got to the put-in around noon on a Saturday, clear and warm, the kind of stillness you only get on a river when nobody else is around. He paddled about 6 miles downstream before finding a sandbar he liked, wide and open with good sight lines in every direction, which mattered to him. He always picked campsites where he could see anyone coming from a distance. He fished most of the afternoon, caught a few smallmouth, nothing worth writing home about. He set up his tent at the tree line where the sand met the brush, and by 8:45, with no moon in the sky at all, he had a small fire going, the flames the only warmth for miles in any direction. The first strange thing was the fire. He'd banked it low before getting in the tent, the way you're supposed to, and at some point he woke to the smell of smoke, a lot stronger than it should have been. He unzipped the tent and the fire had been built back up, actively, flames a foot high, using wood he hadn't gathered. His own woodpile sitting untouched off to the side, exactly where he'd left it. He stood there a good while just staring at it, telling himself maybe he'd done it half asleep and didn't remember, which didn't really make sense, but was easier to believe than the alternative sitting right in front of him. He put it out properly and got back in the tent, listening hard now, the night suddenly a lot louder than it had been an hour earlier, every small sound outside the fabric walls demanding to be accounted for. 20 minutes later, he heard someone walking on the sand outside, not fast. Slow, deliberate steps, circling the tent at a distance, stopping every so often like they were listening for something. He lay there completely still. The steps went around twice, maybe 3 times, then stopped directly behind the tent, close enough that he could hear breathing on the other side of the thin fabric wall. He didn't call out. He knew how that would sound, a grown man just lying there, but he genuinely didn't know what he'd be calling out to, and some part of him thought that if he stayed quiet, it would move on the way it seemed to be moving all night, in slow circles that never quite committed to anything, testing the edges of the firelight without ever stepping fully into it, patient in a way that felt worse than any sudden movement could have. It didn't move on. About a minute later, something pressed against the tent wall right where his head was, hard enough that the fabric touched his face. He felt the shape of fingers through it, unmistakable, deliberate, holding there a beat too long before it pulled back into the dark. He got out through the front of the tent, not the side where the shape had been, and ran straight for the kayak. He didn't grab his rod, his cooler, nothing. Just shoved off into the pitch-black water and paddled downstream as fast as he could. No idea what was ahead of him, only putting distance behind him as fast as his arms would allow. He could hear splashing back on the sandbar, someone moving fast through the shallows, but whatever it was didn't follow him into the current, and he didn't look back once to check. He paddled almost 2 more hours in the dark before he saw lights from a bridge and pulled out. He flagged down a passing car and used their phone to call the county sheriff, who sent a boat out to his campsite the next day. His tent was still standing, gear untouched except for one thing. His knife, always kept in the same side pocket, was found stuck upright in the sand about 10 feet from the tent, driven in deep enough that it took the deputy some real effort to pull it back out. They never found anyone. No clean footprints, no explanation for the fire or the knife. The deputy told him people camp on that stretch sometimes who don't want to be found, for their own reasons, and that he should probably just be glad he left when he did. He hasn't done an overnight solo trip since. He still fishes, still camps with friends occasionally, but he doesn't sleep well outdoors anymore. Every so often, lying in a tent somewhere, he thinks about that hand against the fabric, and he still doesn't know what it wanted or why it left the knife instead of using it.